Hey Rami, awesome to be working with you. Nice job on the improvements. I'm so excited. We're starting to see that here. It looks like it's starting to click, and it's evident in your driving that we made a nice step forward here. Still lots of good work to do, and how we're driving every lap is quite a lot different right now. So what I want to show you here is your last two laps, which are your quickest two laps, and what you did right or better in one lap versus better on another lap, and kind of back and forth with that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with your fastest lap and your line through Big Bend. So what I want to show you here is you attack the brake zone a little bit more into Big Bend this lap, and you used a lot more track in the middle of the corner, which is good. So your first half of the corner here was your best attempt through it. So we're coming in here on your quick lap. Before we're breaking about the 5 board here, we're just inside the 5 board down to the 4.5, starting to release off the brakes here. Now, ultimately, I would like to have seen you try to avoid that secondary heavy brake application. I think you came in here with a lot more speed than you're used to, which is good. And I think you could have continued to release and broke for a longer period of time through here. Instead, what I think happened is you're breaking in, you're like, oh crap, I'm too slow. I'm too fast. I got to pile the brakes in. And now you see you're immediately back to throttle here. In an ideal situation, this is one of the hardest corners to do this in. I don't get to throttle until I get the car pointed in towards that second apex curve. I'm not doing that every lap. That is like a perfect lap. Sometimes I have just a little bit of throttle, but I'm not getting the throttle here. It's closer to the middle of the corner where I have a squirt of throttle, right? So we're over slowing the entry of the corner, and now we're picking up the throttle way early. If we would have avoided the second hard brake application, let me go back and show you this in slow motion here. So you see how we're coming, we should be releasing off. Yeah, we're a little early on our turning point, right? Like we're going to be apexing a little bit early here. But notice what I'm really looking at here is how you apply the heavy brakes again. Then you release off, and kind of on and off. And then we're back to throttle here. Ideally, the next step here is maybe you have a small little bit of throttle right about where that Corvette is, or just before that Corvette, but definitely not back here. So we need to continue to work on that brake release coast. Now here, this is where I want you to end up in the middle of the corner. If I show you your previous laps, you'll see here, you slow it down more, but then look how you're right in the, like you're almost all the way to the inside here, right? Like you're apexing this kind of second apex right about now, which isn't allowing you to unwind the steering wheel. When we use more track, you're going to come in for that second apex and have a car angle that's pointed much more in this direction. But because you don't let the car be free in the middle of the corner, you're coming in with a car angle here, and look how much tighter this corner becomes. So you want to come out, use more track, let the thing rotate about a car without, and then come back in for that second apex, and that's going to allow you to unwind the steering wheel and get much more aggressively back to throttle. So you can't get back to an aggressive throttle here because you can't unwind the steering wheel. Look how you're off the throttle right now, and this is where I want to be aggressively getting back to throttle, and I want to be back to flat here to here, but you can't do that because you didn't use the middle of the road. So now on the next lap, we had a much better line through the middle of the corner, but then we didn't manipulate our car weight transfer correctly. So you have to remember here as drivers, what we're doing with our feet affects the balance. You can create oversteer, you can create understeer. And in this corner, now you have the correct line. So remember how you were apexing, like you were all the way to the white line now. Now your line is perfect, but now you still have understeer and you still can't get back to full throttle until here. But that understeer now comes from a different reason. That understeer is now coming because you're just on this dull maintenance throttle all the way through it. Your throttle trace here is inducing the understeer. When you're getting the throttle, you're taking that weight off the front end, and now you're inducing understeer because there's no weight on the front end. So instead, if we had maybe gotten come in here. Maybe we're slightly more aggressive to throttle, but now we come off the throttle and then apply the throttle in here. You would have had more front grip, and now you would have been aggressively getting back to throttle and hopefully back to full throttle here. So we want to take the first half of your line through Big Bend here, using that track, continuing to work on that brake release. In the middle of a corner, like sweepers like this, coasting's cool. This is a corner where a little bit of coast in the middle of the corner is fine. We're waiting for that car to get pointed towards that second apex, and as we arrive, get aggressively back to full throttle and get the drive into turn 3. Into turn 3, I like what you're doing. I would like to see you continue to work on braking lighter here. So if I see, let's see your peak brake pressure here is 551. Let's compare that to turn 1. I didn't do this before. Let's see here, 1,000, 1,200. So that's good, right? So now your brake pedal into turn 3 is close. You're at like a 4 pedal. I want to see you a little bit more like a 3 or a 2 pedal. What I want to see you do here is brake a little bit lighter and longer, coming off the brakes and ultimately using a little bit more road in the middle of the corner. I can see you're over slowing the car because look how we're hugging that white line all the way through and we're getting back to throttle too early. So this is a corner where look at that Corvette in front of you. I want to end up there. Now, you could do that without opening way wide. So I don't want to have the entry where they are right now. I don't want to end up all the way out over here. For me, the perfect position is just slightly more to the inside here, mid-track. And if you roll enough speed in here, the car is going to take you to mid-track in the middle of the corner. So I want you to treat this sort of like a double apex corner as well. Like Big Bend on the last lap where you brought enough speed and the car forced you wide. Now here, I only want you to end mid-track, but the similar mentality. Brake lighter, so the car takes you wider. So right now, you're about a full half car width or so wider. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do is apex this concrete patch just past the start of it. And I only want to get to throttle as I come into that apex spot on that concrete patch. So here we need to brake lighter, come off the brakes, make the car take you about a half car width wider, and then wait patiently for the car to point towards that second apex so that you can get aggressively back to throttle in here. So now I'm coming back to the second apex, and the difference here, right, is now if I can do that, if I can be patient, my car angle is going to be looking this direction, which means I can be more aggressive back to full throttle, where we still have a car angle looking more in this direction. So now you can't unwind that steering wheel once again, and then once again, you can't get back to full throttle here in between 3 and 4, which we need to do. So it's much like we've got to roll at entry speed, work towards that second apex in here, and now you can see, right, you can't unwind the steering wheel. Right now, I want my hands straight and I'm back to full throttle, but I've got to be more patient back to throttle. So full throttle, full throttle, full throttle. And then in here, turn 4, let's talk about our priority. So turn 4 is a corner that leads onto a bit of a straightaway here. So for me, turn 4, the most important part is getting a good exit. Turn 3, right? It's such a short straight in between 3 and 4. So all I care about in the turn 3 is entry speed and getting back to the left side of the road here to set up turn 4. That's all that matters. So that's why I don't really care about getting back to full throttle or back to throttle until much later in the corner. But turn 4, lead onto the straightaway. My mentality is different here. My mentality is let me bring down my apex speed and let me focus on getting back to full throttle earlier. So our mistake here in turn 4 is a little bit similar to our mistake out of turn 2, where we have this long bit of maintenance throttle. So watch your throttle trace here. 20% throttle, 10% throttle, 10% throttle, 10% throttle, 10% throttle, 10% throttle. Then we start to feed it in, and now we're only getting back to full throttle way out over here. So once again, we're not manipulating our weight transfer. So I want to see you be more patient, squirt up full throttle, and then as you turn in, lift. If you need a little bit of brakes, a little dab of the brakes, that's okay, because my priority is aggressively back to throttle here, working my way back to full throttle, just after that crest, right? It's hard to get back to full throttle before you come over and crest because the car likes to push you wide, but I need to be back to full throttle by now. So we need to make sure we don't just have this, again, dull maintenance throttle. We've got to manipulate that weight transfer. We got to come off the brakes to transfer weight to the front end so we can get the front grip, we can get the rotation we need. And that, again, where your car is looking this direction, that's going to help you to subtly be pointed more in that direction, which again, then you have less steering input. And once again, you've got less understeer. You're able to get aggressively back to throttle. So you can see here the theme of this little bit of maintenance throttle is really hurting us at Lime Rock. We need to come off, roll it in there. Ultimately, I like what we're doing here in the uphill. I think, I don't want to overwhelm you with too many notes right now. So I would keep what you're doing in the uphill. Everything looks pretty solid. Yeah, that looks good to me. Take a look here at West Bend. Ultimately, I think we're turning in slightly early here. I'd like to see you try to pause, turn in about a car length or two later. Unfortunately, there's no visuals here, right? There's nowhere I can tell you like, hey, that's your turning point. But ultimately here, I want to be apexing, just right about mid-curve, just past mid-curve. So you can see here, you're apexing closer to here right now, and that's why you have to open your hands every time. So for me, that's typically a sign of our eyes being slightly low. I'm really looking into the apex right now. I'm looking for that apex, and I'm using my visual of the apex to turn in. So I'd like to see you. This cone is actually a pretty good indication of how early we're turning. I don't think that cone is right where I want to turn in. I want to be probably just a little before it. And I don't want you to rely on that cone because that cone can get knocked down. It could be moved. It could be always different. That's why there's not a good visual here. So it's a good indicator how early you are turning in. So really keep that focus on that mid-curve, just past mid-curves or apex point, and try to, right now when you want to turn in, take a breath and then turn in. But ultimately here, brake trace is much better. Throttle trace is much better here. Ultimately, I like what you're doing here. And actually through the downhill, we're pretty solid right now. The one note for me here is what can get you in a little bit of trouble here is I typically want to be working off the brakes by the turn-in point. High-speed corners, I want to have a longer coast because I want to transition less weight to the front end. So these high-speed sweepers, I typically I'm nervous about the rear end of the car. So those are corners where I don't want as long of a trail brake, right? Because if I'm trail braking, I'm transitioning more weight to the front, and that's going to give me more front grip, a little bit less rear grip. So in these high-speed corners, sometimes I'm coming off the brakes a little bit earlier, and I'm coasting longer in between my brakes and throttle. Small change, right? So here, the one thing I want to point out is as we turn in, you typically add a little bit of brake pressure. See it like that? That can get you in trouble. Obviously, you're fine for right now, but especially in high-speed corners, I want to make sure we're not doing that. So in a corner like Big Bend, my brake zone is in this compression, get to the brakes, coming off the brakes, coasting, and then starting to feed the throttle in exactly where you're feeding the throttle in. That's a perfect place here. Notice here, this is you're probably thinking to yourself, well, compared to Big Bend and compared to turn 3, isn't this too early of a throttle application? But this is a high-speed corner. I'm looking to add a little bit of rear grip here. So I'm okay with an earlier throttle application in a corner like Big Bend, not in a corner like, let me back this up. I said the word Big Bend. I'm okay with an earlier throttle application in the downhill where we're looking for that more rear grip. I'm not okay with this early throttle application in Big Bend, in turn 3, in turn 4, in West Bend. Those are not the corners you want it. So you have to understand the situation and have the understanding of why I'm getting the throttle here, help settle the rear end, working our way back to full throttle, and ultimately you do a really good job getting back to full throttle here. So let me break this down into notes. Big Bend, turn 1 and 2, right? 1's the first apex. It's really one corner. Big Bend, working on rolling more entry speed into the corner, not having that second addition of brakes, using the middle of the track, use all of the track, and then making sure we're not just on maintenance throttle all the way through that second part of the corner. We've got to come off the brakes, transition weight to the front end, and now feed back into the throttle. Turn 3, I want you rolling a little bit more entry speed so the car takes you wider in the middle of the corner, coming back for that second apex. Now you get to throttle, squirt a full throttle, and then turn 4, get rid of this dull maintenance throttle in here. Use the weight transfer of the car. That means get a more aggressive back to throttle out of 3, come off, coast, maybe even a little dab at the brakes, whatever you need to do to get aggressively back to throttle now and back to full throttle here. Those are the 3 things I want you to focus on at Lime Rock. If you got any questions, you can email me. Super excited about the progress. Nice work. Lots of good work still to come. So lots of lap time still to come as well.